Guillermo is born in South America, which he can tell you about, right? But obviously he's American and is locally trained. Did his undergraduate professor. He did his undergraduate work at American University. Yay. And he received his master's degree from Georgetown University in Foreign Service. And he also obtained his law degree from Georgetown University. He has been involved with the CIA, the State Department, the Department of Defense. He's obviously now a fellow partner of mine at K&L Gates. He was also the managing partner of another major law firm here in the city. So he has quite a pedigree. We are pleased and honored to give him a warm Rotary welcome. Guillermo.
When Andy describes all those things, I just keep thinking to myself, there's a lot of scar tissue that overlays some of those experiences. But no, I'm very, very pleased and happy to come speak to you. As Andy mentioned, I'm an immigrant to the United States. My family is from Argentina. In fact, most of my family is still in Argentina. My family came here largely because we had to escape during a period of time there that many people refer to it as the dirty war, when both the left and the right were essentially destroying each other over the bodies of all the people in the middle. And so we got out of there by way of South Africa. So I spent 6 years living in South Africa before coming to the US and eventually becoming a US citizen, which was, I'd say, the second proudest moment in my life after my son was born. So, but what I've had the benefit and the good luck of, a career is probably the wrong word. It's more a set of adventures. And I do a lot of mentoring for young lawyers. I now teach at Georgetown at the law school. I teach law students about artificial intelligence, and I'm very happy to talk about AI. I could speak for days on AI. But I'm often asked, how did you come up with your plan to get where you are now? And I know the look on my face is always the same, which is there's no plan. It starts with saying yes to the craziest things people will propose that you do and figuring out later on whether you made a mistake. And by and large, they haven't been mistakes. But from the beginning, in 1989, I had just finished an internship with the State Department in Cape Town. This was right before Nelson Mandela was about to be released. It's actually, that's not an accurate way to describe it, that the South African government agreed that it was better that he be released because that they knew that that was the solution to their problem. So as a graduate student, I had this amazing opportunity, and these people came to me and said, "You really should come to work for us." And I said, "Oh, I took the Foreign Service exam. I'm going to be a diplomat." And they looked at me. At first, I think they might have had a doubt about maybe I was not the right person for this because I thought they worked for the Treasury Department. Well, it turned out they worked for the CIA, and this was the old way of doing this. They would find you, and they knew some of my professors. You know, at Georgetown, half the faculty probably had been on contract with CIA for all I know. So they described the career path at the time, which was basically first 2 years, you're gonna become an intelligence officer. You're gonna train to recruit people to become assets, we call them, spies. You're gonna get to jump out of airplanes, all this other stuff. And I said, the next question that should have disqualified me, which was, how much am I gonna have to pay for this? No, we pay you. Wow, okay. So I was an adrenaline junkie. I still am in a lot of ways. And so I signed up for it. And I think I'd still be doing that if it wasn't for the fact that as you get past a certain point in your time doing that, the work changes and it's not quite as interesting. And then like I say, I had a son and hello. The life of an intelligence officer is not an easy one when you have a family. And then when I started thinking about what would come next, that's when the next phase of my adventure kind of starts. And that's what I'll be talking about mostly today. And that was, I had the opportunity to spend a year with the CIA in New York at a think tank called the Council on Foreign Relations. They had a fellowship there, and they would pull someone out of basically the firing line and say, we think you're going to go somewhere in the ranks here. So we're going to send you up there to meet a lot of people, to get polished so that you can speak in front of, sophisticated people who, do banking and all that stuff. And so I arrived there on August 2001. Yes. 4 weeks later, the towers were hit. And I was the only publicly identified CIA officer in Manhattan on that day. I was Midtown. So my 1 year stint that was going to be focused mostly on risk assessments became all about what's going to happen with the world, right? When America goes from being a safe place, the homeland, a term that back then we didn't really use very much. I think it still had other connotations, was under threat and was going to be under threat conceivably for, the future. Now I had spent a lot of time in the counterterrorism world before that. So I did, during that year, I had the opportunity to go and speak to NYPD detectives all over Manhattan because they were desperate. They thought there could be Al-Qaeda cells all over Manhattan. How do we know who they are? How do we talk to them? And so I would go once a week. This was one of the missions I was sort of assigned in addition to being sort of an academic. And I would sit with these NYPD detectives and I would tell them what it's like to try to convince a terrorist to work for me as an intelligence asset. And what do they look like? How do they talk? What are the things? And at the end, and we would usually do it at the end of the workday, and they would pop open a bunch of beers. And obviously, NYPD have a lot of Irish and Italian, and we'd have a very good, I'll call it a bull session. And then at the end of that, they would give me a ride back to my apartment, often in the back of their police car. And my poor doorman, I think after the third or fourth of these, he wondered, and he came up to me and said, "Mr. Christensen, is everything okay with you?" And I mentioned that jokingly at the next one, and the two NYPD, and this is why I have a very soft spot for the NYPD, the two very burly detectives walked in this time with me, and in a very loud voice that the doorman could hear said, "Mr. Christensen, the NYPD thanks you for your assistance. After that, I could do no wrong in that building." So, but that experience I had in New York gave me the inkling that there was something I could do outside of the government. And that was this idea that national security was going to be a broader and more comprehensive problem for the United States, right? And it's taken a while for it to come about. And I hate to say it in some ways, but it's really now with the change in administrations that this idea has become completely cemented in our policy outlook. But the idea that I had was, for most of the Cold War, we looked at national security as mainly a military intelligence, sometimes a propaganda problem. Economic questions were largely left to a free market and all the institutions that govern and run that from the United States perspective. Dual role of managing, obviously, a large part of the US economy, but also having some authorities to sanction people and countries when they are opposing the United States. But mostly those two worlds did not interact. And consequently, when you talked about national security in the private sector, you really meant people who did government contracts for defense contractors and things like that. Maybe a little bit of, foreign intelligence, surveillance court, and those things, right? That's 2001, 2002. Now look at the world today. we now are much more like the rest of the world. Most countries, pretty much from the beginning, have viewed economic security as an integral part of national security. And they have no issues with those, the questions and the challenges of economic security being very much influenced by national security. So, and this includes many of our friends, right? France has always had a very active industrial policy, right? Obviously, a country like Russia, no question, there is no divide between those two issues. It's taken us a long time to realize, though, that we had to make that connection and start making it work much more actively. And so when I started looking at the kind of the options for what I wanted to do in the private sector, I realized that this was going to be a very lucrative and interesting area where it combines the questions of how to analyze national security threats and vulnerabilities with the opportunities that the private sector offers. And very relevant to this, and I spent a lot of time working on cybersecurity issues, is the fact that around that time was really when the digital economy, the internet economy, began to break out, right? And today, can any of you imagine doing anything in your life without the internet? Your businesses, your interactions with banks, it's all done on the internet, which is another way of saying it's all done digitally. That is the platform. It's also what I would refer to as the main battlefield, the battleground on which a lot of competition is being carried out. And that's why today we speak of nation states and cyber criminals and all of these threats. And the government seems to be unable to do much about those things. But the reality is because the government doesn't control much of that infrastructure on which that battle is fought. It would be a little bit like World War II, and the US Army doesn't have the right to move the assets around, decide what beaches it's going to hit, what aircraft it's going to move around, because they're all under the control of a company called Amazon or Apple, right? They're the ones who have the assets, and many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of others. The government has a small role in that. And this is the challenge that we face, that I think we're going to be dealing with for the next 20 or 30 years easily, because all the trend lines point to the problem becoming more challenging, broader, and I see no signs that the digital economy is going to slow down. If anything, it's accelerating. So when I put all those things together, I thought to myself, this would be a good time to begin applying these skill sets and ideas that I had as an intelligence officer into the private sector, into either being in business or being a lawyer. And the person who probably convinced me the most that a lawyer was the right way was a guy named Jim Woolsey. He had been director of Central Intelligence. He also been a lawyer. And there's a model for me as well, and that is a guy named Wild Bill Donovan. I don't know how many of you have heard of Wild Bill Donovan. Yeah. I consider him to be one of the greatest Americans, right? A white shoe lawyer, Irish, Republican from New York, won the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration that this country has for combat in World War I, but also a close ally of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was not Irish, and he was definitely not from the side of the tracks that Donovan was. FDR was a patrician of patricians, right? And yet they struck this incredible relationship. And Donovan had spent most of the interwar years traveling all over the world, doing business deals and developing a network of people who could feed him information. So he had a very, very good idea of what was going on in the world. And so in 1940, 1941, when the United States was on the brink of entering the war, Donovan used his connections with the British to begin setting up the precursor to the CIA, which is called the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. Many people derogatorily would call it the Oh So Social Club, because it was drawn from the not just the upper crust of American society, but from academia. They had musicians, mathematicians, people who loved crossword puzzles, which also happens to be a great way to decode Japanese and German codes. They also had hand-to-hand combat experts. And the nickname, sort of the saying about OSS was, it was a group of PhDs who could win a bar fight. I haven't yet gotten my PhD, and I'll leave the bar fights out for now. But it was a great model for what the United States needed in that period of time. They worked hand in glove with the British services. Infamously, the Churchill instructed them to go into Europe and turn the continent ablaze, right? And destroy as much of the German military by using sabotage and all these things. And the stories of the OSS truly are an amazing collection. There are a number of really good biographies of Donovan that I think are very worthwhile reading. He's really a unique American in many ways. So that was another part of my modeling. I was thinking, well, so I could become. He was a lawyer first, and then an intelligence officer. I would flip it around, and that's what I've been working on ever since then. Now, also trying to do some teaching as well, and the like. But I'm very optimistic about the future. I always have been. It's probably a genetic condition that I have. And as I look at where my son is, he's 21 now. He's almost done with his undergraduate degree in aerospace engineering. He's working for a company that's going to put up a satellite next year. And when you hear those things, when you focus on those things, you realize the world is actually heading in a very positive way. And I do a lot of work with AI companies, and I often get asked, doesn't this scare you? Isn't this something that we should all be, having a difficult time sleeping about? And honestly, I don't. I think it's a really positive development. If I just focus on the impact on these technologies on our health, they're revolutionary beyond anything even the people working on them right now can conceive of. I don't think it's an exaggeration, and I probably wouldn't be around for this prediction for me to be able to test it, but I am fairly sure that my son will be able to live to at least 130, 140 without any issue, because so many of the things that cause us to go early are being solved or mitigated by these technological leaps, whether it's the medications or the spare parts. We're going to be replacing the human, key human organs over time that are a problem. So artificial intelligence holds a great deal of promise there. Obviously, like any technology, the internet, computers, whatever, someone with evil intent will always figure out a way to misuse it. That's our nature. But I think in general, I'd give it a 95% positive rating, So for those on the younger set, especially who are avidly writing down something or drawing something there, you should definitely be looking at AI. Play with it. It's a very, very powerful tool. So, and ask for permission, of course, but she has it. Good. I encourage all of my partners at the law firm to play with it, to use it for everything that they can. There are some professions, some lines of work that are going to be depending on where you sit on this, devastated or incredibly energized by artificial intelligence. And lawyers is probably the group that has the most to gain and to fear. That's why I started this teaching this class at Georgetown, because we'd heard that the first year law students were very scared to work with AI, and the school realized that this can't be this way. These students have got to know how to do this and how to use it and exploit it. I love some questions, and if anyone wants to talk about Iran, Ukraine as well, I spent a lot of time in Ukraine, so happy to talk about any of those things.
Thank you. I'm in the same field. I recognize all the names and all the issues. Thank you for that conversation. You were in risk assessment at one time, and risk assessment by AI and digital threats are harder or easier to assess. What do we really know about Huawei or TikTok or all the other things that seem to be used as spy devices? Are they okay or not okay? How can we tell? Be certain about these kinds of threats.
Yeah. The short answer is there's no way to tell definitively. There's enough, I'd say there's enough evidence on the sides to have a pretty strong level of confidence that if you allow a company like Huawei to install most of the hardware that powers your economy, you are susceptible to problems that they can create for you, right? Whether they want to or not. This is nothing new. During the Cold War, both sides, and I would say the United States probably more successfully, inserted unreliable devices into the supply chains of the Soviet economy. Sometimes they thought they were stealing our stuff. We might perhaps have been making sure that they stole that stuff and not the other stuff, and that stuff then didn't work very well for them. So it's not a particularly innovative way, but difference is the scale, right? So if you have, and the internet is the structure, the architecture of the internet is a fascinating, complex set of nodes and machines, and obviously a lot of electrons moving around. But at its heart is a device that some of you, maybe all of you, have at home, a router, right? It can be the router that Verizon or Comcast provides. It could be the Wi-Fi router, but that is the essential piece. It's a traffic cop for all the information, and it tells when something comes in from CNN that you've asked it to, you want to look at something on CNN, it knows that computer asked for that information. It's going to go there. It's going to say, bring it over here. You're going to read it. It's going to send some more information back. From your device to where that data is located can involve hundreds, maybe thousands of other machines, all of it traveling at the speed of light because it's all fiber optic. Figuring out that traffic problem is at the heart of the internet. If those devices are owned and run by someone that wants at some point to do something damaging with that, it can be devastating, right? And that's what Huawei, that's what they were doing. And they were making some excellent routers and excellent network switches and all of that. But you have to decide, and I think the decision ultimately is a sensible one. If there is a likelihood that you're going to have a conflict with China, do you want all your internet devices to have Chinese kill devices potentially, where they can turn them off or things like that? These days, we are finding groups, hackers, although I prefer the term threat actor because I think I'm a hacker. Hackers can be good as well as bad. But threat actors, Chinese threat actors that have penetrated many of our utilities, especially the electrics, right? And have installed code that hasn't done anything yet, as far as anyone can tell. And sometimes we're not really sure what the code is intended to do. But one has to kind of assume that that's probably, it's not intended for a good purpose, right? So in light of that, I think it's a sensible approach that China's a different problem. And in a way, that's at the heart of this point I was making before about the transition from economics and national security are two separate things. I think what we realize is during the Cold War, we had friends and enemies. Our enemies were military. Our friends were economic. Most of our economic competitors were our friends. None of our military friends were really our economic friends. China brings those two together. It's a massive market. It's a massive exporter to us. And now potentially it's also a military threat. And our entire way of thinking about national security was not really designed to think about those two things at the same time. So
Thank you. Hi, I particularly have interest in your topic today because, first of all, good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Dogo. Your topic is actually very motivating to me because I'm a cybersecurity professional and I do a lot of cybersecurity for the Department of Defense and the US government. So I understand in detail, it's not technical jargon. I understand the terminologies you're using. So I have 3 questions to ask you, first of all.
3 questions.
Yes.
Okay.
Because you are very smart and you're loaded with information. So I'm going to have to
That's fine.
engage you intellectually. So firstly, you speak about South Africa, about the conflict in South Africa, which is, it's well known. I extend my condolence to South Africa. I was born in Nigeria. My family diplomats were longtime Rotarians, and my father is head of intelligence in Nigeria. So I'm a politician. So are very aware of these global issues, and we're aware of how things play on the world stage. And being that you have been to South Africa, I've never been to South Africa. I know Nelson Mandela, I know Sarah Bartman and all that from the history club. But I want to know, is there really violence in South Africa?
Is it really what?
Is there really racial violence in South Africa? Since you've been there, I've never been there.
Well, I left, the last time I was there was in 1989. It was before there was the opportunity for racial violence of the kind that people think is happening now. Back then it was apartheid. It was a totally different world. There was definitely a lot of racial violence. It was being perpetrated by the white minority on the Black and African majority. I've been back as a visitor, which is never enough time to really assess the way things are really there. I would just say that the crime rate in South Africa for all people is extraordinarily high.
I agree.
There's very little order. But that's my observation. So.
You're right. And I agree with you on that because even Nigerians and other Africans complain of xenophobia and cannot go to South Africa. It's not a white or Black thing.
Yeah.
It's a cultural, national thing. Whether you're Ghanaian, Kenyan, Black, Indian, you cannot reside in South Africa. That's their beliefs. And I'm really happy that, it came to the limelight this time. Second question I have, you spoke about the government not being able to do anything about this 20-year cyber warfare that we're about to embark with China. So someone who works in cybersecurity, I'm a professional, I'm certified. My dad is an intelligence guy, so it's just life. So basically, I see that a lot of the contracts that I deal with are not directly handled by the company. They're handled, like you said, Amazon, but it's not really Amazon. It's Boeing. It's not Gunman. It's Cornet. It's these big companies that get the billion-dollar contracts, and because they're in charge of the data, they own the data. They call the shots. We label the stuff for the military. And I wanted to say that, being that DC has the largest control over all the data centers, data securities, Loudon, 70% of the world's internet runs through Loudoun County. If there was an attack on America's cybersecurity system, as a former CIA, as somebody who performs reconnaissance, as someone who has ability to be able to, look at system architecture, do you think that the Loudoun data centers will be a target for malicious or nefarious character?
Yes, and they've been a target now for quite a long time.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I want to thank you very much. And
You're
I
welcome.
wanted to ask you one last question. How do you think artificial intelligence is going to impact our society? Because lately we've been deep fakes in society. People are going nuts on the deep fakes thing. And that's why they've brought the Take It Down Act to drop that. But artificial intelligence has a dark side.
I think the sergeant at arms is about to call you on that one. So,
Okay. She's
Yeah.
next.
yeah,
All right.
on AI. So I'll tell you on AI, as I mentioned, I'm generally very optimistic,
Yeah.
but like every technology, it has the potential to be misused, right? So in the early 90s, the human rights NGO community thought the internet was going to revolutionize freedom, right? And there's some beautiful philosophical tracts about how it would open the door for human expression to have no boundaries, no walls. That was the case for a period of time. And then, and I always like to try to connect these things back, routers with the ability to conduct something called deep packet inspection began to become commercially viable. And that is when you may have heard the term the Chinese firewall. China created a perimeter around its internet where it could analyze all of the internet, the emails, messages, etc., in real time going in and out, which was in the early 90s was practically impossible. The amount of processing power for that was we call it at the edge, it was too difficult. That's the case today. You can absolutely know everything that goes on in most networks in a real-time capability with a fidelity that is stunning. That's why when you're on a social media, even before you have thought, I'm interested in this product, it's already teeing it up for you because it's capable of assessing what you've done. And through algorithms, some of it's AI, but others are just simply predictive algorithms. If 10 of us like that product and I just search for something that's adjacent to it, stands to reason that I'll be the 11th to like it. Right? So that's part of what happens in that case. But I think the internet is not a bad thing. It simply was not the perfect solution to everything that people thought. So the same thing I'd say about artificial intelligence. It's not a solution to everything, but it has great potential. And like most things that human beings interact with, at the end of the day, we're going to be responsible for how well we manage or deal with them. But please.
One question. The intersection of economics and sovereign security. I'm somebody who liked Milton Friedman. On the way here this morning on WTOP, I'm listening, and it says that the NATO summit is occurring and that the NATO parties are going to have 5% of their GDP applied to national defense, with the exception of Spain, which is only at 1%. And Trump is already saying we're going to have to tariff them or some type of economic stick. Could you comment on tariffs and other economic sticks to appease the Milton Friedman in me?
So I'll go one step beyond Milton Friedman. Like I said, I'm from Argentina. What we have learned about tariffs and industrial policy and the mistakes that are embedded in that, you could write many dozens of libraries, right? And in fact, it's ironic that Argentina right now is a president that's trying to undo, and is succeeding in many ways, in undoing many of those tariff measures and protectionist measures. So the record so far is not kind to anyone who makes the case that tariffs are a good idea, right? The record is it eventually causes distortions in your own economy that you end up paying for in many times over. That said, I think when you're facing more of a broad national security threat, that facing you on the other side is a country that, if we're correct about this, and by we, I mean the national security consensus, poses this all-encompassing threat, national, military, security, cyber, economics, etc. Can you afford to fight them only on some fronts and leave the other open for them to use that against you? And at the end of the day, economic power is definitely tied to military power. So I'm not persuaded that tariffs are the right way to go, but I am persuaded that what we've been doing until 2010 or so was not putting us in a good place to be able to challenge an ascendant China, especially if she really does intend to do the things that he says he intends to do. And I think if the other thing I would learn from history is when leaders with that much power tell you what they're going to do, you should really believe them because they generally get their way. So.
Please stay with us. This was very informative and I really enjoyed it and I hope everybody else did. And thank you so much. Mr. Christensen, we have a tradition here at our club where we plant a tree in the honor of our speaker and you get a tree. I'm going to give you this and this will give you your GPS coordinates of where your tree is going to be planted. And here's a beautiful pen.
Thank you.
For your lapel.
Thank you so
much. And thank you so much for coming.